Hi, everybody. I'm Cathy Hillenbrand, and I was the publisher of the Real Comet Press that published Portrait of a Market.
And we also, for your presentation, we printed this.
Oh, God. I couldn't recognize that. My husband's like, I think you had that sweater, but I don't know. This is like an 80s ugly sweater.
This was in, I think, September of '86, October, while they were working on the book. Ed Marquand, who did the design for the book, Suzanne Kotz, who was a editor, Cathy Hillenbrand, and Steve Dunnington. And of course, John is behind the camera. We found this in his collection of photos at the University of Washington. And of course, this was never published before. And so we had to print it for this show.
Yeah. So actually, I knew John, I think, through the Seattle Sun. There was like a tribe of people, of which we're all, of those older ones of us here, are kind of a part when Seattle was a lot smaller, and people hung out, you know, at the market and in Belltown. There were lots of artists living in Belltown, and people were on Capitol Hill, and there was just sort of this tribe of people, and we all interconnected in lots of different ways. So I knew John. I don't even know how I first met John, but I know through the Seattle Sun. I knew him through that. I owned the Comet Tavern before I started the Real Comet Press, and so through that. And one of the important connections John has with our family is we were involved, the number of us were involved in this organization called Kanto. So Skip's pictures actually were great to see your pictures of different aspects of John over the years, and different, I'm like, oh, I remember that and remember that. But one thing that really struck me about these pictures was how beguiling some of them are, because John is John, and he's very focused and very specific minded, and kind of, there's sort of monomaniacal in some ways, you know, and very literal in a, I don't know quite how to say that, but very literal in a certain way. And then there's a few pictures where he's like picking over his arm, and they're so sweet and so cute. Now I'm going to embarrass my son who's here, because when my older son was like 2 or 3, there were some people, when he was just a little kid, there were some guys in town that he just really liked. And they were men who wore like, you know, silk shirts maybe or something. But one of them was John Stamets. And Nathaniel would run up and hug John whenever he saw him, and John would be sort of like, what's this kid doing? But I think it's that character of his that showed up in some of those photos where he's just kind of really endearing in them. And John was involved in Kanto, and I went on a group tour of Nicaragua, a cultural solidarity tour of Nicaragua in 1984, and I met the man who's now my husband and the father of my children on that trip, and John was part of that trip. So it's just kind of it's just kind of funny how these things all interact. And I knew him, I knew him before that, and then when I started Real Comet Press, he came to me one day and said, I'm taking these pictures, I want to do this book. And I looked up, all my files were in an archive at Washington State University, but I did have a little bit from the contract, and so I just found a couple of things here, hang on, that I just thought was interesting, which was, we signed our contract 31 years ago. He got a $2,000 advance, and it was printed in Hong Kong, and I don't know if that's the first book I printed in Hong Kong, but Ed Marquand was like a book designer and stuff, and he handled all the printing. And there were these conversations about how the quality of the photos, and when I look at that book now, I think, well, maybe it would have been more successful if it had been like a really big format, because those pictures are so big and wide. But the whole idea was to make this book that was kind of democratic, that you could get out to lots of people. And John had big ideas about how successful it was going to be, because we talked about them, but you know, it was just, it came and it went, and the life of publishing. And we wanted to get this book published, but he kept wanting to take pictures. So we kept moving the deadline of when he had to turn in his final prints, you know, so that he could keep pictures, taking those pictures. And one of the other things that really strikes me about it right now is that Steve writes about this and John writes about this in the book, is the gentrification of the market. So the market was saved, and then the market was redeveloped, and then the market slowly began to gentrify along with everything else. But at that time, you know, there were lots of artists still living in Belltown, and Belltown was nothing like what it is today. And so it's fascinating at this time thinking about the issues about gentrification in Seattle and just looking back at sort of the scale and the nature of it then. What else do I want to say about John? I really don't. I mean, he did amazing work, and he did that whole Alaska Cannery Workers show at the Wing Luke, which I don't know that there's anybody here who was involved with that. And that was kind of around the time, he was kind of doing that while he was taking all these pictures in the market and stuff. And he was just always doing all these different things. And I don't know really what else to say, except I miss him. Nicaragua? Yeah, so it was like a group of, I can't remember how many of us there were that went to Nicaragua, and with this group Canto, and we were there celebrating the 50th anniversary of the death of Sandino, and so we all traveled all around, and John was, that's where those Nicaragua pictures in the archive come from. I remember Holly Near was there. We were on the bus with Holly Near. I don't know. That was a long time ago, but all that political. I mean, that ties in with the Cannery Workers, which was a very active union in Seattle. And, John just had this kind of wide-ranging interest, and then he moved very much into the architectural photography and documenting all the buildings and the construction and all that. So I don't know. That's I don't give presentations, and I didn't bring any slides. So that's all I really have to say, unless somebody wants to ask me a question.